Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell, joined by attorney Cesar Gavidia, and we're going to discuss Northwestern Mutual disability claims for doctors and dentists. And Cesar, this video is specifically targeted for doctors and dentists for a few reasons. Number one, Northwestern Mutual targets their policies to doctors and dentists pretty heavily marketed, which you can easily see through searching on the internet and seeing the agents that are selling it, as well as the multiple videos that Northwestern Mutual has out there talking about their policies. And the second reason, because we've represented hundreds of doctors and dentists with Northwestern Mutual disability policies, so we're very familiar with them. But in this video, I want to provide some tips about what to expect if you have a Northwestern Mutual disability claim, whether you're applying or your claim has been denied, considering the fact that we've handled probably upwards of 500 to 600 of these claims on behalf of Northwestern Mutual claimants. And right off the bat, Cesar, when a doctor or dentist calls you and says, look, I have a Northwestern Mutual disability policy, what is your expectation as to what you're going to have to deal with when it comes to dealing with Northwestern Mutual versus another type of disability company?
Well, the one thing about Northwestern Mutual that you can expect is that they're really very, very thorough in the way that they perform their claims review. You could expect a pretty high level of scrutiny of your claim, but Northwestern Mutual is also one of the more reasonable disability insurance companies out there. I mean, for the reason that, look, they have gone after this highly prized clientele of doctors, dentists, high earning professionals. So, they do have to provide that kind of high level of customer service through not only their product, but also their claim review process. So you could really expect that they're going to do a very thorough claim review process from beginning to end. But, we've also seen many times, many times over the years, where they didn't do necessarily the right thing, or you see them fall into this kind of laziness that I see some other disability insurers fall into when they just review a piece of information, or they see something that they were that maybe they didn't like on a video surveillance, and then suddenly you find your benefits interrupted or questioned.
Well, Cesar, I want to get into the meat of the claim for doctors and dentists, which has to do with what the occupational duties were of that doctor and dentist, because we'll talk in a minute about the medical condition. But when it comes to doctors and dentists, there's going to be a lot of information that they're going to have to show about what their duties were. And how is Northwestern Mutual going to evaluate what the pre-disability occupational duties were of a doctor or dentist?
Right. So with regards to, at least when you're engaged when you're in the occupation of either being a doctor in a medical specialty or a dentist, and perhaps in a specialty as well, I think what's really critical about what you purchased here through this Northwestern disability insurance policy is the coverage that you have for insuring your own occupation. In other words, you're not insuring, necessarily the general occupation of being a doctor. At least you hope you're not with what you bought. But your medical specialty, what you're engaged in, whether it's being a surgeon, whether it's being a dermatologist, whether it's being a pediatrician, or you're a periodontist or an endodontist or a general dentist. What's critical is the specific own occupation duties you're engaged in day to day that's really earning your bread and butter.
And how is Northwestern Mutual going to evaluate those duties? What will be required to be submitted from these claimants?
So the very first thing in terms of the claim application, they're going to ask about your occupational duties. And one thing I don't really necessarily like that I've seen in some claims where we were hired kind of post-application, and when I say post-application, it's after the doctor has submitted their claim to the insurance company, and then they call us to come in, is that when they're describing their occupational duties, they might say, well, I'm 30% surgery and 40% office work or clinical work, and then for the remaining I'm doing administrative stuff. I think that you just made a major mistake by putting together these, by guessing at these percentages or throwing these percentages together and submitting them to the insurance company, because now it does not look like your bread and butter, what's making all the money for you, is really all that substantial and material. So aside from that claim application, what's also important is the coding, procedure coding that you're submitting. And for most doctors, that's CPT codes. For dentists, that could be ADA codes. Now, in some cases, a dentist may not be keeping codes. I know that I just handled a case for an orthodontist who didn't keep any sort of codes whatsoever. It's completely a cash practice. But in most cases where there is procedure codes to be tracked, you're going to have to provide years of procedure codes, because those are going to designate, or at least show what the substantial material duties are that you produce the most units for, and that produce the most income potentially for you, that you at least build the most for.
Now, Cesar, there's some controversy out there, and maybe the controversy is among the salespeople who sell Northwestern Mutual, what they call own occupation definition of disability, and the other disability insurance companies out there that target the same market of doctors and dentists for long-term disability insurance coverage. A true own occupation definition of disability says you're unable to perform the substantial material duties of your own occupation. And often it dials into the medical specialty, which is really the substantial material duties of what you were doing before you became disabled. But Northwestern Mutual has a disability, doesn't offer that true own occupation definition of disability, where they say unable to perform substantial material duties of your own occupation, because of the fact that they add into their policy, at least the more recent ones that we've seen, and they say, and not gainfully employed. So unable to do your occupation and not gainfully employed. But a true own occupation allows you to be, for example, an orthopedic surgeon who's doing spinal surgeries, knee surgeries, shoulders, backs, whatever, and then you stop doing your surgeries, but you still just run an office practice, and you're just doing patient consults, and you're doing injections, and you're referring out. That particular doctor could be totally disabled because of the fact that they're not doing surgery anymore. In the Northwestern Mutual disability policy, they have a medical occupation definition of disability that if you continue to work in the medical field, which many doctors and dentists potentially do once they give up their surgical procedures, then Northwestern Mutual has this 50% criteria where they look at 50% of your surgical duties versus 50% of what may be your clinical duties. So we're not going to dive into the really nitty-gritty of that definition of disability here, because candidly, it is somewhat confusing when you read it, and it's quite extensive in the disability policy if you were to be looking at a true own occupation definition of disability from other carriers versus what Northwestern Mutual calls the own occupation definition of disability. And Northwestern Mutual has their theories and why they think this is, and their arguments as to why they think this is better for a doctor, because it still allows them to continue working. But the reality is that most policies are a true own occupation, and you can do something else, and it doesn't matter if you're gainfully employed. You don't jeopardize your benefits. So that's an issue. And the point of that is that the CPT codes or the ADA codes that you were just talking about a minute ago become extremely important when evaluating a Northwestern Mutual claim. And they become even more important, Cesar, because a lot of doctors that we advise go from working on a reduced basis or what's known as a residual disability. And there's a transition period where, but for the ones who have an accident, meaning they fall or they get into a car accident or some kind of event that happens where it's just clear that they can't work, there's usually this degenerative medical condition which is causing this reduction in their capacity to work. And often doctors and dentists wait too long to file a claim. I find, Cesar, I don't know about you, that years ago they cut back on duties but didn't think to file a claim when they probably should have. So then you get the doctors that are within a couple months of filing a claim where they're starting to cut back on their particular duties. But that could go on for 6 months to a year. So which is the period of time that Northwestern Mutual is going to look at their pre-disability duties and what they were doing?
Well, I mean, to the point you just made, I mean, they're going to go back and look at the pre-disability duties, depending on what the claimant is representing. When their residual or partial disability began and when their total disability began. My spidey sense goes off when I am talking to a doctor or a dentist who calls me and they say, well, really, I started cutting back because of my back issues, 4 or 5 years ago. Well, that's a real problem, because if that started happening, then your claim really should have begun 4 or 5 years ago. I know that's difficult to do because you're not often kind of anticipating that your income's going to sharply decline, or that you're going to be ready to file a disability claim because you're hoping things will pick back up again. But at least from what I've seen, that usually isn't the case. And then we're trying to play this catch up and go all the way back to establish these pre-disability duties from now 6, 7 years ago, when your income was the highest, when you were working the most, when really, the production and the substantial material duties at least could be illustrated as being, the highest. And it's actually a very difficult case to make. And there's a case currently that's in the courts where the disability insurance companies' lawyers are arguing that the whole claim is invalidated, because even though the person now became totally disabled maybe a year or two ago, okay, they're claiming partial disability all the way back to 4 or 5 years ago, and the statute of limitations is up, or that there was a notice issue. I mean, these are things that with Northwestern Mutual in particular, you've really got to be on the ball with, because they're going to take advantage of all of those things. It may not be right now, but if they go into court, you can sure as heck bet that they're going to assert these defenses, and you could potentially be left with saying, well, now your material duties were half of what they used to be prior to when that decline really began, and are they really substantial material? And when you're looking at that 50-50 definition of disability that you have with your Northwestern Mutual policy as well, now you're not even establishing that the substantial material duties were more than 50% of your occupation. You're going to find yourself in a real predicament there, because if you're still able to perform clinical at 50% or more, they're going to say you're not disabled.
Right, and you have to look, Northwestern Mutual does have some very favorable residual disability definition of disability, which basically says you can't do the duties for as much time as you were doing before. And I think even if you have as much as a 15% reduction in the amount of time that you used to do, that you could be eligible for partial. Of course, you have to have at least a 15 or 20% loss of income from what you used to earn. But for a lot of doctors, I think that's one of the strongest parts of their disability policy, is having this residual disability that allows you to cut back in your capacity of what you were doing, possibly bring in an associate, and use residual possibly as a transition to see if you can continue working in some capacity and continue to do some of your material duties. Because for many people who have degenerative conditions, it's, I used to work 4 to 6 hours a day, but maybe if I only go 2 hours a day, I'm able to do those types of duties. And maybe that goes on for a year, 2, 3, or 4 years until it gets to the point where, no, I don't feel comfortable anymore treating a patient because it exacerbates my condition so much, or my fine motor skills have degraded so much that I'm just not comfortable doing those procedures anymore. So at this point, I want to seek total disability. And I want the doctors and the dentists to understand that once you start on residual and you cut back your duties and you're doing things part-time, that's not the criteria that counts for total disability. It's what you were doing before your initial date of disability. So there's no harm in going to a cutback schedule, having a reduction of income, a reduction in duties. That's not going to be the criteria when it comes for total. It's going to be everything you were doing before that critical date of disability, which is why, Cesar, when you talked about going back years, which is hard to do, but a doctor who's having issues and starts to have a loss of income but still working part-time should file a claim as soon as possible. Because if not, you're changing your occupational duties to the limited capacity that you've been doing for 2 years. But Northwestern Mutual is likely not going to say, we see you cut back 2 years ago, because often doctors and dentists are the worst, Cesar, at going to doctors. And I don't necessarily blame them because they more often than not know what's wrong with them, or they speak to a friend, or they speak to a colleague, or they get a quick MRI and they do nothing for 2 years, even though they've been suffering and they've been limited. But that's
Right.
terrible in the world of filing a disability insurance claim, as you know, because the claim's only as good as you are on paper.
Right.
So what we'd like to do is if you have a Northwestern Mutual disability claim, no matter what stage you're at, contact Cesar, myself, any of our disability lawyers. We'll provide you with an immediate free consultation. We'll let you know what your options are and what we think are the best steps for you to take with regard to a disability claim. We know there's a lot of people who watch our videos who aren't necessarily ready to file a claim or even evaluating Northwestern Mutual as a disability company. We encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we often put out these videos. We're releasing about 2 to 3 videos a week in which we provide claim tips. We provide cases about Northwestern Mutual and cases about your occupation, all related to long-term disability insurance claims. And this information is really important because it allows you to think like a disability insurance company. And the more you can start to think like a disability insurance company, the better position you're going to be in to get your claim approved and to keep your benefits from being denied in the event that you do get on claim. So no matter where you live in the country, we're available to assist you, and we look forward to the opportunity to speak with you should you need us.